This video is all about how civilians during World War II faced with shortages of supplies, used the limited resources they had on hand to make all sorts of strange foods. Without further ado, let's get started. Hunger is a shared memory for everyone who lived through World War II. And on the home front far away, from the smoke of battle, it was often even more keenly felt. During the war, soldiers of course consumed the best supplies. The price they paid was the risk of sacrificing their own lives at any moment. Meanwhile, civilians, while also adjusting production, had to tighten their belts just to get by. Children would get scolded for spreading butter on both slices of bread. Adults, because the grocery store got a few new, unfamiliar boxes in stock, would form long lines, and the government wished it could practically overnight turn the entire population on the home front into vegetarians. In those years, when the war effort came first, rationing became the common choice for nearly every country involved in the conflict, reducing the civilian population's reliance on imports as much as possible, and instead focusing on domestic production and consumption that could be controlled, was one of the core principles of the wartime rationing system. Under a system like this, people had to reevaluate things that we had previously taken for granted. This also naturally gave rise to many small inventions and creations that made clever use of the limited resources at hand to achieve a better living experience. So today, let's take a look at some of the weird and wonderful foods that people were forced to create during the war. Butter. When it comes to its importance in Western food, I'm sure I don't need to explain it to you. But during World War II, butter was a rationed item that you could only get in set quantities. So someone invented this. Knox Butter. The Knox in Knox Butter refers to Knox brand gelatin. When making it model, first you need to dissolve the Knox gelatin powder in water, then add it to milk. Next, mix it with real butter. And here's where the magic happens. You've just doubled your butter. And because the texture is so similar, the taste of this Knox butter, when compared to real butter, is surprisingly indistinguishable. What a brilliant little invention. Actually, behind Knox Butter is the hidden story of a remarkable woman. Her name was Mrs. Rose Knox, the head of the Knox Gelatine Company and one of the most prominent American businesswomen of the 20th century. Mrs. Knox's husband passed away in 1908, after which she took over the Knox Gelatine Company. In the early 20th century, women still faced a great deal of discrimination in the workplace. Even if they could work in a factory, they had to use a separate entrance. So on her very first day, in charge, Mrs. Knox permanently closed the factory's back entrance, declaring that all men and women were equal. So for this magic trick of stretching butter to be done with Knox Gelatine, a product from Mrs. Knox's company, it also in a way inspired the ordinary women who were quietly contributing to the nation during the war. The British have a long-standing love for pies, going as far back as the 14th century. King Richard II even passed a law to control the price of local pies in London. Pies also pop up all the time in all kinds of books and movies we're familiar with. You know, beef pie, lamb pie, chicken pie. Even at the Hogwarts Christmas feast, they have to have steak and kidney pie. But all of these popular pies have one thing in common. They're all filled with meat. But the Woolton Pie was a vegetable pie. During World War II, to deal with a shortage of meat, a chef at the Savoy Hotel named Francis Lottery invented it. Later, the head of Britain's rationing program, Lord Frederick Woolton, formally recommended this food to the British public during wartime. And that's how Woolton Pie got its name. The way you make a Woolton Pie is to first boil the vegetables and put them in a baking dish. Then you pour in oatmeal and mashed potatoes to thicken it. Finally, you use a small amount of flour to make a crust to put on top of this vegetable mush. After that, you bake it for half an hour and you're done. When you eat it, you serve it with gravy, even though it seems like a very healthy dish. Compared to a normal meat pie with its hearty fillings and rich flavor, Woolton Pie was just missing way too much. So the British people were always very resistant to it. Honestly, I think the British cooks just weren't very skilled. So what if there's no meat? What's the big deal? Couldn't you have made some buns filled with cabbage and vermicelli? Couldn't you have pan-fried some savory pastries with fried dough and chives? At the very least, you could have taken some Sichuan peppercorn oil and made a big bowl of mixed vegetables. And then, with that little bit of flour, whipped up some dough drop soup. Even that would have been way better than whatever that old guy's Woolton Pie was. Faced with store shelves that were often empty during the war, or a weekend when the ration allowance was about to run out, what could a resourceful and clever housewife make for her children? War cake was a pretty good answer. It's a simple cake made with no eggs, no butter, and no milk. This means its core ingredients. We're really down to just two things, sugar and flour. To make a war cake, you boil a big pot of brown sugar and water. Then you add a small amount of clove and cinnamon powder, plus a packet of raisins. You boil it until the brown sugar has completely dissolved, and the raisins have absorbed the water and plumped up. Then you use that raisin-sweetened water to make the dough. After baking it for 1 hour, what you've got isn't a brown sugar sponge cake. You've made a war cake. And compared to a traditional cake, it has a shelf life of up to a week. You could say it's a perfectly suited dessert for tough times. Most importantly, don't let the war cake's simple ingredients fool you. Its flavor is actually really good. I mean, even in Eastern Canada today, it's still a super popular food. Pair it with a cup of hot tea and a big slice of cheddar cheese, and people over there absolutely love it. Kraft Macaroni and Cheese is an iconic food. Not only did it help build the Kraft food empire, it's a shared memory for an entire generation in the West. In fact, when this product was being marketed, they catered to the linguistic habits of different countries and gave it several different names. In the US and Australia, it's called Kraft Macaroni and Cheese. In Canada, it's called Kraft Dinner. In the UK and other countries, it's called cheesy pasta. It sells the best in Canada and the United States. This stuff was even once hailed as the national dish of Canada. Back then, on average, every Canadian consumed 3.2 boxes a year. The appearance of Kraft Macaroni and Cheese was all thanks to the technology for the mass industrial production of processed cheese. The patent for this technology was obtained by Kraft's founder, James Lewis Kraft. Later on, a salesman named Grant Leslie came up with the brilliant idea of packaging the macaroni and cheese together in a single box. And just like that, Kraft Macaroni and Cheese was born. This magical food, just like a tie that sells better when unemployment is high, has this natural, amazing ability to defy social trends. The more turbulent the times, the more depressed the times, the better it sales. The secret can be found right in Kraft's slogan. Kraft Macaroni and Cheese claimed that for 19 cents you could feed a whole family, and in 72 minutes you could whip up 4 meals. Plus, the product itself had a 10-month shelf life, which made it the top choice for countless families' dinner tables after the Great Depression began in 1929. Later, as America gradually emerged from the economic shadow, World War II broke out, and so Kraft Macaroni and Cheese had its second heyday. Under the rationing system at the time, you could trade 1 ration coupon for 2 boxes of Kraft. This made it for the average person, who was in a tough spot with meat and milk shortages, the best substitute available. In 1943 alone, they sold 80 million boxes. To call it the instant ramen of the West might even be an understatement. It should be called the product that saved America. For the longest time, making vegetarian dishes look and taste like meat has been a popular skill in the culinary world. But the motivation for doing so can be vastly different. In times of peace and prosperity, it represents a desire for health or satisfies a certain curiosity. For example, Gardine's meat substitutes, they aren't any cheaper than real meat. But in times of war, it was truly born out of the helplessness that comes from a scarcity of resources. The mock fish fillets of World War II clearly fall into the latter category. The British love for cod needs no elaboration. But during World War II, getting that much fish wasn't easy. So creative British chefs during this time also carved out a new path, developing many decent mockfish recipes. A more conscientious recipe involved mixing rice and eggs together to make a fried rice patty. Then it was cooled. When it was time to eat, they'd take it out and cut it into fillet-sized pieces. More ridiculous versions is made with minced mushrooms, flour, and a little seaweed powder. Then it's shaped like a fish fillet and deep fried. And you know what? If you just look at it, it actually looks pretty convincing. Actually, it wasn't just fish. All kinds of meat, milk, and other high-protein foods were supplies that had to be sent to the front lines first. So during that same period, a lot of substitute recipes for them were created. For example, lentil goose. In Central European countries like Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Hungary, people enjoyed eating goose. During World War II, the government recommended this recipe to the public. The ingredients were extremely simple. The most basic version only required 3 things: lentils, onions, and bread. The method was to boil the soaked lentils into a paste, then mix and fry breadcrumbs and onions. Then you put the bread and onion paste in the middle, cover it top and bottom with the lentil paste. pop it in the oven to bake, and that was it. Of course, if you were from a well-to-do family, you could add a pound of ground sausage. As for whether it tasted good or not, well, I think that mainly depended on the housewife's seasoning skills. Compared to lentil goose, oat milk was also one of those imitation foods you really had to psych yourself up to believe in. And the way to make it was even simpler. You just grind up some oats, mix in hot water, then strain out the oat residue, and you're done. The only thing to watch out for was the concentration of oats. If it was high enough, it could at least look the part. But if you were stingy with the oats, what you made would basically look like dishwater. But to be honest, wouldn't using these recipes that are purely based on appearance have the opposite effect? I mean, you could just drink the liquid off the top of your oatmeal. Is it any different? Under normal circumstances, the supply of staple foods like bread represents the bare minimum of public trust in the government. If you can't even supply bread, that means you're in big trouble. But for civilians, war is just one big problem after another, isn't it? So during those most difficult times, people came up with things like these. First up is scrap bread. Its ingredients could be whatever leftover wheat products you had on hand. The last few pieces of dry, crumbly bread that works. Cookie crumbs from the corner of the cupboard, throw them in. People even gave these scraps a special name, crumb fudge. Next, you'd melt some kind of sweetener in a pot. Brown sugar, white sugar, honey, or corn syrup, anything works. Toss the crumb fudge in there and mix it all together. Then just let it cool and cut it into squares. On top of that, there was bean cake. This mostly appeared in Poland during World War II, because at one point flour was extremely scarce in Poland. So the Polish people ground up beans to use as flour. When the bean flour is boiled down, it develops an elasticity similar to regular flour, which allows it to be baked into something that's like a cake. Then there's carrot cake. This one was probably a little more high class than the first two, because during the process, you at least had to use a small amount of flour. The process starts by mashing carrots into a paste. Then you add flour and mix, because the carrots continue to release juice as you're mixing. The longer you knead the dough, the redder it gets. After that, whether you add milk or brush it with oil and sprinkle on sugar, all depended on the resources you had at home. Rationing during wartime was the kind of thing that absolutely a necessary sacrifice, but one that's destined to be hated. It's a complex and massive undertaking. In theory, it should first and foremost be built on a foundation of absolute fairness, then using things like rationing vouchers, coupon certificates, and point systems to act as the weights. It adjusts the balance of the scales. The goal is to ultimately allocate more of the limited resources to the people who are most beneficial to the country. But the reality is that when a wartime rationing system is implemented, there's always a shadow that goes hand in hand with it. And that's the black market. Its logic is the exact opposite of the rationing system. People who are idle actually have an advantage over people who work hard. They have more time to hang around the stores, more time to study the loopholes in the true value, exchange rates between various goods. And after profiting from all of this, they have even more capital to develop. Special relationships with the bureaucracy. It's a vicious cycle. That's why fairness under a rationing system is practically non-existent. So what else is there to say? I guess 1,000 words can be summed up in one sentence. Cherish peace and stay away from war.